evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. My name is Professor Heaven Crawley, and I'm Director of the UKRI GCRF South-South Migration, Inequality and Development Hub, which is quite a mouthful. So we're basically better known as MIDEQ, and MIDEQ stands for Migration for Development and Equality, which really very much reflects the project's aspirations, that we want to generate knowledge and information about integration and migration between the countries of the Global South, otherwise known as South-South migration, and to bring this knowledge to bear on our understandings of the relationship between development and equality. Equality between the North and the South, between rich and poor, between migrants and non-migrants, and of course between migrants themselves, for whom there are huge differences in the ability to travel safely and legally, and for migration to bring benefits to their countries. You can find lots of information about MIDEQ on our website, so I won't say any more at this point. But I would like to really very warmly welcome you to our second MIDEQ public webinar. We are really keen at this point in the project's life to start telling people about what we're doing, but also finding out more about what others are doing and sharing the learning between our projects and the work of others. And since we started this project back in February 2019, we've been spending a lot of time in the project thinking about how our work might have an impact in some way and what we'd like it to do. And I think it's very clear that one of the major themes arising from our work so far has been this idea of changing migration narratives, in particular by decentering research away from the dominant narratives in the global North, and ensuring that we engage with a wide range of different voices and perspectives, particularly in the global South, where the majority of our work is taking place. So in many ways, we're trying to change the story of migration. And this is a theme which is captured by a piece of work that we're currently undertaking with one of our creative partners, Positive Negatives, and you'll hear more about that very soon. But for today, we're particularly excited and happy to have with us Professor Paul Cook and his team from the Changing the Story project, because we really think there are a lot of synergies and relationships between the two areas of work which we could all learn from. I'm going to hand you over to Paul in a moment. Really happy to have you with us, Paul. Thank you so much for firstly being a member of our advisory board and for your very useful input into that part of the process, but also for helping us to engage with these other major pieces of work that are interested in similar kinds of issues. Paul is Centenary Chair of World Cinema at the University of Leeds and a member of our advisory board. And he specializes very much in the politics of representation and voice in world cinemas, and has been working with a number of participatory filmmaking projects, supporting young people to explore the legacy of difficult pasts of one kind or another. And as I say, I'm going to hand over to Paul in a minute, who will introduce you to some of the members of his team who are working in different contexts, exploring some of these issues. Just a few very brief housekeeping points to begin. The session will be recorded and is being recorded, as you'll see. So if you don't, for whatever reason, want to be on the video, then please just take yourself off video. We have an agenda which you hopefully have access to. We're going to have some presentations from members of the Changing the Story team. And then my colleague, Professor Alison Phipps, who is co-director of MIDEQ with me, will open up a conversation with some of the members of the team about the methods that they use and the ways in which this opens up different kinds of conversations. And then Alison will share a question and answer session. I think you can write your questions in the chat, or we'll find other ways of collecting them up. And I'll just come back at the end to say a little bit about our next event. So I hope all that's clear, and I'm very happy to have you all with us. Paul, I think the plan is that I hand over to you next, and that you introduce your team, and thank you once again for being here and making this event possible. Thank you. Paul, I don't think we can hear you. Are you there?
I was just saying, you'd think 10 months into the pandemic, I'd have figured out how to use the technology. Not the irony.
Well,
right,
next you'll be showing us your emails, so it's all good.
Yeah. I'm just trying to pull up, let me just pull up this presentation. Can you see that?
Yeah, if you just want to put it on put it on full screen rather than notes, it might be clearer for people.
It should be on full screen now, no? Is it not?
We're seeing your notes, but you have an Apple, so I can't really help with this.
Is it gone? Is that any good?
That's it. Perfect. Thanks, Paul.
Okay.
Over to you.
Well, first of all, Heaven, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to present to your gang, as it were. We're kind of we're not quite near the end as we'd hoped we would have been by this stage in the project. I think it's fair to say, but we're coming towards the end of the commissioning phase in changing the story, where most of the work is now being completed, and we're really starting to draw together the learning from the project. And so the timing for this is really good for us, because it's a really good way of kind of being able to share some of the learning that's emerging from the project and really kind of getting into conversation with other cognate projects across the kind of GCRF landscape. It's been a complete privilege to be involved in the advisory group for MIDEQ, not least because of people like you and Alison working on it, and from whom I learn a great deal, but also because there's such obvious synergies between what we're doing. Hopefully what we're also going to see today is the particular synergies around the notion of South-South migration, which isn't the particular focus of our project, but it's certainly something that's kind of is a strongly emerging theme across a number of our projects. Anyway, so I'm literally going to talk for hopefully about 3 minutes before I pass over to 2 of our star projects that are currently running and changing the story, and they will introduce themselves and they'll also introduce them to their teams. It's also really great to see so many colleagues from across the Changing the Story network involved in this project. I kind of asked you to be involved in so many different things, so I'm so grateful that you kind of continue to bring such enthusiasm to these discussions, so thank you very much for that. Anyway, without further ado, Changing the Story is an AHRC GCRF Network Plus project. The focus is around building inclusive civil societies with and for young people in post-conflict settings. So the core aim, at the sort of the top of our theory of change, if you like, is to evaluate present and inform future practice in civil society organisations working with young people in post-conflict settings, post-conflict being defined very, very broadly in this project. The idea being looking at how civil society organisations can support the building of strong institutions that can support communities to deliver sustained social justice. And whilst some of the things that we're doing are slightly different to what MIDEQ's doing, I think the core values of the project absolutely resonate with one another. Okay, so what does this mean in practice? Well, firstly, it means supporting CSOs to reflect, to create space for them to reflect. This is something that the organisations that we're working with really that's one of the reasons why they were so keen to be involved in this project, is actually generating space to do something that they can't normally do. Most of our organisations are very focused on delivering frontline services. They're always at the edge of what they're, at the edge of their capacity. They're always trying to deliver the services and then hustle for the next tranche of money. And we really wanted to try and do something different with the fact that the GCRF funding is research funding being put into conversation with development professionals on the ground. So we wanted to kind of open up a space to really utilise the space for reflection. We adopt a situated approach. This, I think, is one of the key things about using an arts and humanities approach to thinking about this, thinking about not about kind of coming up with a kind of one-size-fits-all generic toolkit about how you do arts-based development, but understanding the particular challenges to doing this kind of work in particular settings. And within that, really trying to focus on participatory co-production approaches, and increasingly in our project, really making sure that these are rooted in a youth-led approach to development that is concerned with supporting young people in post-conflict settings. So that's the kind of core overarching aims of our projects. The approach that we've taken, we started in 5 countries using a participatory action research methodology. We tried out, building on current best practice, we tried various things out, we evaluated it, and that then led to the commissioning of a further 11 projects. And again, so you can see it's very much a kind of participatory action research approach, an iterative approach, evaluating these projects, which has now led to the development and the commissioning of a further 6 larger scale projects. And we're going to hear from 2 of our project teams working in Venezuela and in Kerala in India. And so without further ado, and in order to maximize the amount of time that we have for kind of the main feature, namely our presenters to engage you guys in conversation, I will now pass over to, I don't know who's going first. Shree?
I think it's me.
Katie? Okay, so I pass over to Katie. Over to you. Let me just stop sharing my screen.
So I don't have any slides to share. I'm just going to read to you. I'll mainly be reading something that Mila has written, but for the sake of time, it makes sense for me to read it in English rather than her in Spanish and then translating. So our work with Young People for Changing the Story revealed the extent to which migration had affected the everyday lives of young people in Caracas, Venezuela, and is one of the major forms of trauma which needs to be recognized and countered moving forward. This led Mila Perez and the team at the Centro de Investigaciones Populares, or Center for Popular Research, to a project focused specifically on migration using the same methodology. So we'll be talking mainly about that rather than kind of the earlier stage of changing the story. As I said, I'll read Mila's presentation, but then the questions we'll do kind of with live interpreting. Mila and her team thought it was most valuable to share some findings with you, but we can talk more about methodology in the questions if you're interested. Migration can be considered from different points of view, from the conceptual through the reception in different countries to immersing ourselves in the lived experience of the displaced. Seeing it from a young person's perspective in a country in conflict is a challenge. At the Centro de Investigaciones Populares, we have decided to understand and interpret migration through the eyes of young people and their experiences, which is a revealing and very moving task. Today, a disheartening future is projected for Venezuelans in terms of migration and forced displacement. By the end of 2021, the United Nations projects more than 7 million migrants and refugees. It's an alarming number that needs to be dealt with by national and international organizations and research groups that can assess the problem. The effects are multiple inside and outside the country. In the country, vulnerable groups are growing. There are many single grandparents, families of children without adults to care for them, and young people who are left with criminal violence as the only way to survive and maintain the family. Faced with great social problems, tough challenges arise. Today, our gaze will join with that of young people who decide to flee from living conditions and conflict that expose them to a permanent border between life and death. This is what migration implies for Venezuelans today, not knowing what will happen tomorrow, not having a port of arrival, and being surprised by the novelty that they find, both good and bad. This story of Venezuelans walking through South America will be told through the stories of young people who decided to flee for their families, for their lives, to be able to eat, to escape violence, and looking to help those who remain in Venezuela. We will make the journey with Yunma, Brown, and Jolly, 3 stories chosen from among several that we collected throughout our qualitative research based on focus groups and life stories. For us, the word of the person who narrates their own story and places us in their context has an incalculable value. Let's start with Yunma, a 21-year-old with a young daughter who she takes with her on this challenging journey, both dreaming of overcoming the hunger they experienced and the impossibility of having freedom in Venezuela. We will briefly focus on the challenges implied for Yunma and what her experiences tell us about the trials of migration. Yunma leaves Venezuela because she's left without job options. She had been a successful businesswoman, but suddenly she is left with nothing and is forced to migrate. On her journey, she will have many experiences. We highlight here her experience as a midwife to another young Venezuelan who is forced to give birth on the street. In this act, Yunma shows bravery, courage, aptitude, and dedication. This fragment that we have titled "Giving Birth in the Dark" is taken from her larger account. So this is now quoting Yunma. And that day the girl gives birth. We rest around 9, 10 at night to sleep. The girl gets me up at 12 o'clock at night. They call me Blondie because my hair was dyed blonde. And she said, "Blondie, I'm peeing, I'm peeing." I stand up and say to her, "How are you peeing?" They light her up with the telephone and I see that it's water and say, "You're not peeing, your waters are breaking, you're going to give birth." The woman fell ill, birthing pains. The men stood in the road, stopping cars, but the cars didn't stop. They said they were going to call an ambulance, and the ambulance never came. The police never came. Nothing ever came. I had to deliver the baby. The child was born, all well, thank God. The child was born at 2:15 in the morning. We went to bed to rest and sleep, as she had already given birth. What else were we going to do? At 5 in the morning, we got up because we needed a doctor to see her. I'm not a gynecologist or anything like that. And well, God gave me the strength to do it. But the only thing I asked God was that all was well, that she got to a doctor and they could examine her. At 5 in the morning, they didn't want to stop cars, and I told them, we're going to put stones on the road. Somehow they have to stop for us because it's an emergency. A girl just gave birth. Then the police arrived. They were going to put us in jail, who knows what, and I told them, put me in jail, but I'm not doing anything wrong. Here is a girl who just gave birth with a child that we don't know if she's okay, if she's sick, because I'm not a doctor. I had to do it because no one could stop to take her to the doctor. They told us that they were going to call the police, but they never came. The policeman says, well, what time did she give birth? Yonma replies, at 2 in the morning, and it's already 6 o'clock and nothing. A doctor needs to see her. If something happens to her, whose fault is it? Mine? No. The policeman replies, yes, it is your fault for sending her out to walk. Yonma replies, it's not your problem why we're walking. It's your responsibility that there's no authorities on the road. On the one hand, this episode shows us the willingness to help and solve problems on the part of the Venezuelan migrant and the human relations that are established along the journey. On the other, the little willingness to assist on the part of the organisations of the country to help migrants in extreme conditions. We see Yonma's situation through her own eyes, but she also places us in a group of young people who share the same situation. A woman in labour is a 19-year-old girl. Her husband and her companions on the way are the same age, a whole generation in forced displacement. We continue our journey accompanying Brown, a 19-year-old young man. Older brother of a family made up of a mother and children, he decides to leave once survival mechanisms have been exhausted and escape the danger involved in staying in Venezuela at his age and in his conditions. He says, if I stayed, I would become a criminal. He did not fall into crime, but warns that is a real danger when there's no possibility of supporting the family. Brown tells us, I left because of the situation, you know. I'm head of my household and I help my mum, my brothers, and it's a joke. The situation was already difficult because, damn, the coins weren't enough for anything, for food, bills, and anything. So I decided for a good future, for a better life, to go to Colombia. I left here for Colombia. In Colombia, he's able to make do. Brown becomes a baker. Through his work, he manages to save and send money to his mother. But then in 2009, sending $20 was a good sum of money. Work allowed him to save and send, but the pandemic starts and the weak economy cracks. He moves from his safe place and onto the trails. He becomes a trochero, a trade that allows you to take people and merchandise from Colombia to Venezuela through the illegal zone called a trocha. I was working on my own. Those who are in the trochas are guerrillas. They're the ones who say, you're on this plateau and there are the paths of the trails, pure mountain, stone, river, things like that. You come along with your bags and the client. Look, you have to pay the pass to them. How much is it to pass? It's 5,000 pesos, depending on the merchandise you're carrying. Do you understand? They forced me to pay them, forced to pay the pass, and they recognized us, the trocheros, because we walk shirtless. It was like a law there, you know, the shirtless trocheros, so that they would see that you're a trochero and they would not charge you to pass. He goes from being a baker to a trochero, forced into the latter job since the pandemic is closing job opportunities that he had found in Colombia. The guerrillas are in control, but he doesn't work for them. Brown is paid by the client who crosses the trail and in turn pays the guerrilla a vaccine, a kind of fee for protection and permission to cross. The trail, according to the story of our migrants, is a territory without a state. On her migratory path, we also accompanied Jolly, a young entrepreneur, 26 years old, forced to flee to Trinidad and Tobago. She leaves us a moving account of what the maritime border implies, its dangers and challenges. Quoting, I said, I'm never going by sea anymore because it's very dangerous. That is, everything that you can imagine happens at sea. Well, they can, as they say, peck, have your organs removed, they kill you, they sell women to men from Trinidad, they make them slaves, they throw you into the sea just to take your money, even if only $200. They throw you in, and who is going to see you? Who is going to claim you? Nobody. It's a risk because you're going illegally. No one knows that you've left Venezuela for Trinidad, and it's a danger, a lot of human trafficking. But I left because it was really horrible here, and I said I have to go. Jolly's story serves as a contrast to the stories of our young migrants who have travelled the land border. The latter reveals a difficult path, but the sea has dangers and an ease of the migrant disappearing that we have not seen on land. The crime of murder by throwing someone into the sea to steal an insignificant sum of money, or the fact of organ trafficking and human trafficking, places us in a situation of impunity and little value for human life. Migrating under these conditions tells us about the dehumanization to which this political regime subjects us. Through our research, we have seen the great efforts of the young migrants. There is no resignation. They have life projects that they cannot continue in their country, therefore they flee. The family is a great motivating force. It is worrying that the largest segment of the population that has been emigrating in recent times is the young, but it's also logical that this is the case because migratory conditions are extreme, from environmental to socio-political conditions to the fear. Whoever migrates must be strong, although it does not happen in all cases. We will close this presentation with some stories of fear, horror and death, both at the Colombian-Venezuelan border and in Venezuelan territory. These are concepts that our migrants use when defining the life they had to live. Under the title, The Terror of Being Eliminated, Christine, a 32-year-old woman, tells us, "We arrived at 2 in the morning, and when we arrived, the guard, because they believed themselves to be, I don't know, a god, they threatened us. They told us, well, you can't be rebellious here. You don't exist for anyone here or outside." That's like a threat. I took it like that. You don't exist for anyone. No one knows you're here. I'll kill anyone who acts up. That is terror. This story took place in Apasi, one of the quarantine detention posts in border areas, centers dominated in some cases by Colombian guerrillas or paramilitaries in Venezuelan territory. The state is completely absent. Horror along with terror marks the path for those who return in quarantine time and shows us the hostile reception of their current country of origin. Such hostility, contempt, and discrimination is expressed in these places whose living conditions are narrated by these people, but also in the narrative spread by the regime that the returnees are biological weapons. Carla, a 22-year-old girl who lived in Colombia but returned to Venezuela in July 2020, tells us about a moving episode, the death of 3 children due to diarrhea. Guasaldito's problem was the water that we drank. When we arrived in Barquisimeto in Venezuela, the child died from diarrhea. Just from diarrhea, 3 children died. How many children have died in this forced migration? Carla tells us about 3 in a single story, in just one group of walkers. We have to wait for the many more who have died in anonymity for the story that is not told but is lived. That is why it's so necessary to continue documenting this unprecedented social experience of Venezuelans. At the Centro de Investigaciones Populares, we've been studying Venezuelan culture for almost 4 decades, and today we are facing some of the bloodiest challenges of our history.
Thanks very much, Katie and Mila, for just uncovering some of the really powerful narratives that you've been working with in your project. Shall we move straight on to Shri, and then I'll hand over to you, Alison, to carry things on. So Shri, do you want to come in? You've got a presentation, I believe.
Yeah, I got a presentation, Paul.
Yeah, so over to you.
I hope that you can see the slide.
Yeah, we can see that perfectly.
Okay, thank you very much. And tribal education methodology, migration, art-based methodologies, and sustainability. I myself is the principal investigator of the phase 2 Changing the Story project. So Okay, so tribal education methodology is a phase 2 large grant project. The tribal education methodology is an arts-based international project aiming to explore the South-led epistemologies, empower the vulnerable youth, eradicate poverty, lack of education, and social security. So it is basically a collaborative project between government of Kerala, universities, NGO organizations, arts, artists, grassroots civil societies, organizations, and young people in Wayanad in the southern state of Kerala. So the issue of migration in Wayanad is slightly different, because rather than migration, it is of the tribal communities. The migration takes place in those regions because rich and powerful migrants coming to Wayanad make the tribal communities, which is the the largest population in that state, make them displaced. So that's the context. So that is the story of the people. The region is located in the northeast of Kerala in the Western Ghats with altitudes ranging from 700 to 2,100. The region is declared by UNESCO as a biodiversity hotspot with endangered animals, plant and plant species. Wayanad is also known as the spice box of India. So it is a large population. Wayanad has the large population of tribal population in Kerala. Each tribal community has its language, ritual, customs, and social hierarchy. So when you look at the tribal heritage, it's an amazing range of forms you can find in the culture, from the bamboo crafts to archery, rituals, and indigenous medicine, healing practices, and plant medicine. So that's a large scale of activity. So this is just to give a flavor of the what the community is, because the singing and dancing is a part of their life. So everywhere at any occasion they sing and dance. But the community is marginalized in many ways, marginalized economically, socially, culturally, and pedagogically. The community is heavily marginalized. The marginalization starts with the government policies. So first of all, in the ratification of the Indian Constitution in the 1950s, make the state the custodian of tribal homeland. And again in 1927, Indian Forest Act and the Wildlife Protection Act of 1973, both effectively forcing the tribal people out of their homes in the forest land. They become landless and homeless. And at the third level, so we can see that migration of rich farmers, rich and powerful farmers, migrating into the fertile lands of Wayanad. And that added to the fact that so multinational companies owning large plantations, mostly tea, coffee, and other spice plantations, large plantations in that region made their entire community as agricultural land laborers. So when you look at the community tribes in Wayanad, you can see that they are heavily displaced within their community. They are farmers with no land. So mostly their occupation is, agricultural labors in the farmlands. And there are farmers with the land is a major, metaphor you can see you can describe the people of, tribes in Wayanad. So the tribal ownership of the farmland is an ongoing political issue. So whichever the government is coming to power, so they will resist every moment they resist any request or any protest. All the protests have been heavy handled by the government. So tribal the land and their forceful evacuation, police evacuation through brutal means, remain an ongoing issue in Wayanad. The pictures shows the recent one. In 2011, there was a large protest, which is called the Muttanga protest. Muttanga is a particular region where they have a lot of farmlands. So that is another issue that we find in the community. So beyond that, so largely when you look at the state in together, the rape cases in Kerala is, for the last amidst 3 times last 10 years. When you look at the census, 2017, 500 rape cases were registered. But when it comes to 2015, it is going to be 1,200. And in 2016, it's more than 1,400. And it is interestingly, many of the recent cases, when you look at that, so the victims are from the tribal communities. This is not only in Kerala. This is largely the other settlements, tribal regions in India. You can see that tribal young women are vulnerable to abuse. So most cases were unregistered because they're fearful about the consequences when the cases are registered with the police. So beyond that, so you can see in my field work, I have seen, and my team has also identified a large number of teenage mothers. Teenage pregnancy is a major issue in that region, and suicide among the teenagers is another issue. So, and when you look at the problems in education, so the literacy rate in Kerala is higher than many other parts of India, because it has 94% of the education when you look at the state of Kerala. And in general, in Kerala, the dropout is 0.53. But when you look at the education, tribal education sector, the numbers are really alarming. So the Wayanad has the highest overall tribal school outputs, dropouts. For example, in a census 2007-18 census shows that 61.11% of the school dropout in Wayanad only. So what these young boys and girls are doing? So they are going to the plantations. They are working in the plantations, not only in Wayanad. So there are middlemen. So Wayanad is bordered with Mysore on the one side. Mysore has a large tea plantations and coffee plantations. And mostly what these girls and boys, girls and boys are doing is there are middlemen collecting these young boys and girls from Wayanad and then transporting them to the large tea plantations and coffee plantations in Mysore. So, and that is the place where they have been, addicted to the drugs, so, so many things happen on that during this transport of the boys and girls. And when you look at the 2011-12 census of the school dropout in Wayanad, you can see the hype from 61% to 77.2 23%. So, and also when you look at the problems, what are the problems of tribal education in Kerala in general, but Wayanad in particular? And the state syllabus, the school syllabus has a little scope in accommodating tribal language or tribal culture. As I said, each community, each tribes has their own language. It is something different when you come to tribes in Kerala. So when you look at largely in the tribal community, tribes in India, for example, they have a single language spoken in particular state. For example, in Bihar, tribes in Bihar speak in Bhojpuri. Or in West Bengal, tribes in Purulia in West Bengal, they speak in Bengali, the language which is common to the mainstream language. But when it comes to Kerala, the problem is the linguistic diversity of the tribes, because there are 18 tribes in Wayanad. They have 18 languages. They speak 18 different languages. And the mainstream language of the state is different. So most of the school syllabus is education is done in the language of the language. So when we come to school, and first of all, the syllabus has a little scope of flexibility of accommodating the tribal language and their culture. And the educators of the tribal schools, they come from the non-tribal background. They have no idea about the history and the culture of the tribal communities, tribes. So as a result, that triggers the dropout, because when they come to the school, they learn in a foreign language, the language which doesn't give respect to the youth learners, so tribal youth learners. So that is one of the psychological aspect of this dropout. And when they drop out from the school, they go and work for the farm, the large plantation. So that's the kind of things. So this is the larger context, the wider context in which TEM project is placed. So the objective of the project is to develop a sustainable educational model, and that is the major objective. One of the key objectives of the project is. And also the project is to use art-based participatory approaches to integrate tribal language and tribal art into the curriculum. So the whole aim of the project is to eradicate poverty, because lack of education leading to unemployment, that is leading to drug addiction, suicide, and a lot of other issues within the community. So developing a sustainable education model for the tribal education, tribal youth learners is the only way to stabilize the community. That is so as I said, so some of the activities are the digital documentation of the documenting the tribal culture. So that we will use as the resource to develop the toolkit. So the development of the toolkit is we are working with the tribal educators, educational experts in tribal education, and a state educational department. And then so that's the process in which we are trying to develop the TEM toolkit. And we also implemented a drama club in each school, and consultation with the government authorities, particularly with the education department, is ongoing. So we have a number of projects, and I can just to mention about the two projects, two specific activities we are doing. So the landscape is Wayanad is amazing. And so at the same time, so memory landscape is one of the projects, one of the activities in the project, which is, so each TEM volunteers are bringing one plant from their tribal hamlets. And it's a eco restoration of the school campus. So making the school campus as friendly as their hamlets. So in that way, so we are trying to develop an eco-friendly, ecological awareness to the students, and as well as, so the wider ambition is to have an eco-restoration, to implement eco-restoration in the school campus and beyond. So another project, another activity is the storytelling walls. So when we look at the schools, so they are not tribal friendly at all. there is no way of, so as that is the way, so most schools operate, and particularly in Wayanad, it is not a tribal friendly atmosphere. So the eco restoration project, as well as the storytelling walls, is making the school campus making the school campus much more tribal friendly. So we asked the youth volunteers to collect the stories and songs from their culture, from their language. And with a internationally leading artist, Sajida Shankar, you can see her in the slide. So she conducted a art workshop, where students draw their stories or songs in the walls. And 100 participants from 5 tribal schools were attended in the workshop. So there was an overwhelming response we received from this. One participant said that, so I never thought that I am an artist and I can paint. My parents show my friends what I did in the school wall. Honestly, I can't believe it. So I think that this is one of the process of making them proud of their own culture, because that's one thing constantly we find in the throughout in the process, that they lack a confidence of their language, they lack a confidence of their culture. So the project did a lot of work to make them confident about their language and culture. So COVID hit, and the project was, stationary for a while. We couldn't, go to the places. And the government has strict measures to anyone going to the tribal areas, because it's a highly vulnerable community. So we couldn't go, the team couldn't visit there. But at the same time, we developed some mitigation plans for the corona situation, because much of the literature are in English. So that literature of the, whose material are all in English, and then some of them are in Malayalam. But we found that there is a lack of reachability of these informations to the tribal communities. But what the team did was, as a mitigation plan, is to translate World Health Organization's corona information into tribal languages. We translated into 5 tribal languages. So you can see one or two of the examples. And we focused on 2 activities: giving them corona informations on their own language, and also safeguarding activities. When during this lockdown, we have heard a lot of incidents about vulnerability of the teenage girls. So the 10 volunteers traveled to the places, the tribal hamlets, and we worked with the 5 communities. We have chosen five tribal communities, and the 10 volunteers visited 45 tribal hamlets. We worked with 1,000 youth learners, 100 educators, and 3,500 families. So divided into small action groups, and they visited to that tribal, hamlets to promote these ideas, corona for protocol, as well as the safeguarding measures. So the program, we called it One to Niluva in tribal language, called One Community. So that is the plan. That activity is called One to Niluva. So when you look at the collaborators, we are really lucky to have government as part of the project, because the problem is, if you want to go to the tribal areas, regions, to do some work, so we need to get a lot of government permissions. One of the advantages of this project is government being part of, at least 3-4 government departments are working with us. Particularly the Department of Public Education, Scheduled Tribes Development Department, Kerala Development Innovation Strategic Council, and Kerala Social Security Mission. So, and along with that, we have a few NGO organizations and the University of Kannur being part of the project. So, and looking beyond these activities, so we are going to finish the project in March. And we have already started thinking about the maintaining a sustainable approach, so how the project can be sustainable in the beyond March, beyond the project. So we found that, so it is better to set up an NGO. So we call that NGO Ontu Niluva, which is one community. So we are thinking about the process is started to set up this NGO. And there are three areas where we need to work. We are thinking of working in the future. One is providing opportunity for, because as I said, many of these young boys and girls, so they are going to the farm nearby large, plantations. So bringing them back and giving them, traineeship, apprenticeship, and a skill development to pursue them, so we are planning to work with local businesses, small scale industries, and giving them training. That is one area that we wanted to work to rehabilitate this, displaced youngsters. Second one, because there are a lot of, although government doesn't approve that or agree that there are teenage pregnancy and suicide in the region, but there are plenty of pregnant rape cases, teenage pregnancies and leading to suicide and that sort of thing. So that is another area, safeguarding awareness program to the community for preventing social and emotional vulnerability of the tribal youth, leading to teenage pregnancy, sexual abuse, rape, alcoholism, and suicide. So we really wanted to work on that area. And the third thing is creating a youth policymakers forum. We already set up this youth policymakers forum, which includes 16 adult, young people. And so this is for the wider implementation for more responsive system of governance for tribal friendly policies and practices. In March, these youth policymakers are going to meet the chief minister of the state and sharing some of the our findings of the project. So this is what. And throughout in the project, so we have conducted a press conference. We approached the media. Several press conferences were organized during the process, and we have plenty of media coverage about the project. Largely, the population of Kerala is 34.8 million. Is the population, because since it is a highly educated state, literacy is very high. Media has a very media got a very strong grip in the society.
Sri, I'm really sorry to butt in, because I know you've got so much you can tell us about this project, but I'm really keen to make sure that we have plenty of time for conversation. So I wonder, could you start to kind of draw it together?
Yeah, this is the last slide.
I thought it might be.
Okay, so I think that so we reached at least 1/3 of the population through the media. So and this is a summary of the project. The project has achieved quite a lot of significant achievement by this time, and we are looking forward to have more activities beyond the project in March. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Shri, and also to Katie and Paul and to Mila for those really fascinating and incredibly relevant presentations for our work with MIDEQ. I'm grateful to Paul for situating this obviously within an arts and humanities framework, and for foregrounding the way in which that has been approached, particularly the ways it's been approached as a storytelling project. And I think that's particularly significant for us within the work that we're doing in MIDEQ, because in the share-ins that we've had in our internal conversations, especially listening to our international partners, the focus on narrative change of changing the narrative about migration, of nuancing the narrative about migration based on the data and the empirical evidence that our different corridor teams are producing with our work packages is absolutely crucial to our work and to our overall theory of change as well. So thank you, Paul, for highlighting that. Katie, Mila, I know that you are listening with translation. Thank you for doing that. And I know that you're on your phone. So again, thank you for trying to come and join us, even though it's tricky with phone data. We really appreciate that. Muchas gracias. But Katie and Mila, thank you so much for sharing that presentation. I was really struck in what you were saying about the extent to which you were focusing right in on the visceral and very difficult to hear stories of bodies that migrate when they are radically unsafe and subject to violence, and really aware that for a lot of people listening, this might be triggering of difficult feelings and emotions as they listen to the stories that you were sharing and that you had accompanied of organ harvest, of blood, of birth in a street, of waters breaking, of the lack of education that young girls might have about their bodies, of the way in which bodies are unsafe on the street, and that the most vulnerable are those of the child that is to be born. So Katie, that really resonated with me a lot, and I'd like to come back maybe in conversation to that. And then Shri, thank you just for your energy and passion in presenting the tribal education program, and for really, I think, enlightening all of us here about this particular group of people and their vulnerability and marginalization as a result of laws that have been passed that have deprived them of their land and their livelihood and their tribal heritages. And then what you have been doing with this group to try and bring back dignity and to tell the story and to advocate. So that storytelling for both you, Katie, and also for you, Shri, was central to the work that you were presenting. But also the way, what really struck me, and maybe this is where we can bring this into conversation, was the connections that you were making between language and land and body, and then the law, its presence or its absence for good and ill. And just as I bring this little introduction to a close, to say I was really struck and minded of work that I've done over several years now with Māori in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And in Te Reo Māori, the language spoken by the indigenous peoples of Aotearoa, New Zealand, the word whenua is the word for placenta, and it is the word for land. There is an intimate, deep connection between the processes of birth and the way that the placenta is buried in the land, in that land and in many other countries around the world, and the way in which land might be lost or displaced. And I just wonder if we might open out the conversation and actually consider a little more the presence of bodies within your projects. And Katie, maybe if I can start with you, you really focused in, I mean, not just on bodies, but on bodily fluids, blood, water, pee, organs, all of that was central. And I just wondered why it was you chose to do that in presenting your work. Katie, if you might want to unmute. Yeah, are you able to be with us?
¿Cuál sería la dinámica?
Katie. Hi, Mela. Hi, Mela.
Hola.
Hola, hola. Katie, I can't hear you. You're on mute. I think. Try that. No, I still can't hear you.
No se escucha, Katy. No se escucha.
Ahora sí, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Ahora sí.
Okay.
Ahora sí.
Clearly there's a problem with my mic. So I was trying to say that Emilia wrote the presentation, and so we're going to ask her. Pero Mirla, si puedes hablar un poco más sobre por qué eligieron hablar tanto de los cuerpos y de las funciones corporales en esta presentación y esas cosas tan viscerales.
Bueno, primero porque nuestra investigación está centrada en la narración del sujeto. Nosotros no colocamos, cuando hablamos de historias, las historias son narradas desde la propia vivencia de la persona y van priorizando, digamos, lo que sería lo importante en esa articulación de vida, ¿ok? Las historias muestran al mundo lo que está ocurriendo en el interior de cada una de las personas. Entonces, la prioridad la ha colocado ella. En las distintas narrativas, al estar centrada en el cuerpo, en el sufrimiento, también nos va revelando, digamos, sociológicamente, filosóficamente, el biopoder que va sometiendo a las estructuras, a la persona, a sus expresiones más básicas. Entonces, ahí podemos ver, digamos, los límites de la vulnerabilidad. Estamos frente a una persona que el sentido de la vida se está tejiendo en este momento, en el momento de la migración, el sentido de la vida se está tejiendo a partir del sufrimiento, a partir de esos controles corporales y de esa búsqueda de la libertad. Porque otro elemento importante es precisamente que son narrativas centradas en prácticamente una épica libertaria, o sea, estás saliendo de un país en conflicto que no te permite vivir, en el que no puedes solucionar ninguna necesidad básica, y estás explorando otro mundo, pero en esa exploración lo estás haciendo sobre la base de lo más duro, desde la extrema vulnerabilidad. Pero es importante destacar que la orientación, el sentido de la narrativa está en el narrador. Y nosotros como investigadores lo que ponemos es digamos, en el discurso sociológico, antropológico, filosófico, lo que el otro está viviendo.
Muchas gracias, Mira. And just for everybody listening, you can see Katie's incredibly impressive, rapid typing of the translation into the chat function. But really, just to give a gist of what Mira was saying, which I was catching in the gist of my incredibly basic Spanish and Portuguese, that the choice to focus on bodily suffering as a way of showing the importance of biopower. And that these are people whose lives are completely conditioned by bodily suffering and the search for freedom. And that they are leaving a country in conflict where they can't meet their basic needs. And basic needs are the needs that will sustain the body, of food, of protection, of medicine, of shelter. And that the focus on what's happening on the inside of the body is a way to start to explore the outside. But this exploration also comes with dangers and especially felt experiences. And that here it's really minding me both of the work, Mila and Katie, of John Paul and Angela Lederach in their book, When Blood and Bones Cry Out, which is also a piece of work which is focused on post-conflict and looking at the experiences of those who might have been in conflict and displaced internally or externally, but where it's the stories of blood and bones and tears and sweat and diarrhea and all the, forgive me, all the shit, real and metaphorical, that is part of the experience of vulnerable bodies. And the stench of it, all of that is really a very important, I think, contribution that you've just given us, and reminder to really think about how we might be both considering our data and our approaches as a way of telling the stories by going to the inside of the body and coming out and out with the breath. Shri, if I might come to you now, because there was a similar trajectory with your work, and I was really struck by the way that we clean up the mess when we talk to policymakers.
Yeah.
We don't use obscenity. We don't talk about women's bodies and the excrement. We don't talk about the actual experience of rape that you're talking about here. We try and sanitize it to try and have a hearing. And I was really struck by the way that what you were doing was really fusing the storytelling with the land and with the experience of the land. And that your images were experiences of what happens to the land when rich migrant farmers come in and they burn it and they chop down the trees and they displace the people who have been the traditional custodians. So I was seeing a real parallel with Miela's story, Miela's writing, but you beginning to tell the story from the inside out of the suffering of the land, which burns and which floods and which bleeds from the trees. And I wonder if you could speak a little more about the land of the tribal peoples that you're focusing on here.
Yes, I'm happy to do that because, as I said, land is a fertile land. The land is known as the spice box of India. And that is the reason why these rich and powerful migrants and the multinational companies are interested in that fertile land. So the migration started from 60s and 70s and different 3 or 4 levels of range of migrations taking place in Wayanad. So the people in Wayanad have, perhaps, I don't know whether you know this, because they have the traditional rice varieties. The most number of traditional rice varieties are kept in Wayanad, in India. So they have traditional eco-friendly agricultural means and methods. They have traditional healing systems. They have a huge repository of knowledge about the plant medicines. So this is the kind of a land, that land. So and the people and language are the other things, so everything was displaced and devastated from 60s onwards. So we can see that this is one of the things in the post-independence India. The vulnerable, the tribes become more and more vulnerable from 1947 onwards. So this is an independent India has, so we see in the independent India. So that is the kind of the thing. So we realized that, so the first thing to work with that is to healing their wounds, because they have wounds, because they are not proud of their culture. They are not proud of their language. So how to make them proud of their language? And most of these, multinational companies and rich farmers use the, tribal youth as somewhat a bonded laborers, so laborers. They are transported to interstate, they are transported to Karnataka, Mysore, they are the laborers, so some of the, pictures are really terrifying, because in the open lorries, so the young people are transported into open lorries, crossing the state borders. That is a disturbing picture we can see. So this is the land, and their memories are broken, wounded. So this is a healing process they need. So the TEM project initiated in the first year is the healing process, making them confident of their language, making them confident of their culture.
I find this absolutely fascinating what you're saying here, Shri, and I think the connections that I'm seeing with Miela and Katie's work, but also for us to begin to maybe think metaphorically within our work, to what extent are our migratory corridors like birth canals? What might it mean to actually think about migrating bodies in some of the ways that you've been actually offering to us, but also what you're saying here about the ability to speak and retain your language. You know, some of the work that we know has gone on with migrant communities, for example, in the United Kingdom, with complementary language schools for migrant communities, the Greek language schools, the Urdu language schools, the Arabic language schools, where heritage and culture and language have been retained, and how those might be organized and sustained on models and following models like the one that you've actually been doing here with the tribal displaced peoples. That could be a really valuable way of us thinking about the use of flexible funding that we have within our MIDEQ project. But just really struck here by the way that we speak about language as mother language, and we talk about, you know, the land here, the way you're talking about it. We will speak about the rape of the land as well as the rape of a woman's body, yeah. And that actually there is underneath this a womanist politics, I think, emerging in the work that both your projects have been doing, that might itself displace some of the clean and tidy ways that we try and treat these stories when we're telling them, to sanitize them for what, quite frankly, are often audiences of largely male policymakers. So I think there's a really interesting gender dynamic coming here that I'm sure those in our work package 1, our gender work package, will have plenty to think about and speak about. I'm aware that we obviously we have time for this conversation, but there are some questions that are already starting to come up in the chat, and I do want my colleagues to be able to come in and ask some stories here. And I've noticed already a question from my colleague Gamali. Gamali, I'm wondering, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the stories that you've just put in the chat of Mila and Shri and Katie?
Hello, everybody. My name is Gamali, and I work with Alison in Glasgow on the MIDEQ project. Okay, so I was just asking how telling the stories of how telling the stories can force the emergence or the re-emergence of mother tongue and other forms of languaging. Because in our experience, we realize that even when you've departed from your mother tongue and you speak a dominant language, when you are under pain and pressure, without even thinking, your mother tongue emerges. So did you come across this as an experience in your project? Or was it a consideration?
Yeah, maybe if we go to Shri first and then we can go to Mila.
Yeah, because, you know, I think during my project, what I found is, even though heavily suppressed their own language, because when you come to the school, you know, students from people from different tribal communities, they come to the school. A school doesn't have any program, even in the assembly, none of them speak in their own language. And they all speak the common language, in the mainstream language of the state, which is Malayalam. So which means that there is a systematic approach from the authorities to suppress their language. You know what happened? I have been with the students during their breakout, you know, so intervals and breakout sessions. They form small groups, communities. In the playground, I can see small communities are emerging where they speak their own language. So there are two different spaces: a place where they are boarded, where there is a systematic implementation of marginalizing their own language. And within that space, I can see that small floating islands where they recover their own language. I think that what I found is that gives them enormous strength when they speak in their own language. I think that the irresistible strength from the young people to speak their own language. So that was the feedback, from a strong feedback, and that gives a particular direction how important their language and culture. Unless, many of the students, they wanted to speak in English, and when they realized that I come from England, so UK, so they asked me, can you teach us English? We want to speak in English. So that is another thing, because I'm so excited to hear that. But at the same time, they don't want to lose their language and culture. Yeah. So I think that what is going on in Kerala at the moment is somewhat an uprooted approach, because government authorities don't want to approve that this is going to happen there. So, yeah.
Thank you, Sri. And I think that comment you've just made about this gave them strength. I think it's something that certainly has resonated with projects I've led in the past, where we've seen, yes, the importance of a language that can bind people, that can be a possibility for common communication. And that might be a spoken language like English or French or one of the many dominant colonial languages. But equally, it might be an artistic form. It might be music, or it might be dance, in the way that you showed that lovely picture of the women dancing and singing all the time, as you said. But actually, that when people realize that they can express their deepest needs or desires or understandings in their mother tongue, that there is a strength that comes and a confidence, because that is held over and above the one that is there in what might be the lingua franca, the common language. I'm just wondering, Mila and Katie, if you also have a sense around the uses of language to express these incredibly painful stories of the body, mindful of the fact that many young people may not ever have been given an adequate vocabulary to speak about what was happening. And Katie, when you were reading Mila's story, the fact that the young girl thought she was peeing when actually her waters had broken was a really good example of that. So I was wondering if you have some reflections on that. And you'll need to unmute yourselves first. Thank you.
Mila, ¿si
Sí,
puedes
aquí
hablar
estoy.
un poco de eso?
Dice que muchos no tienen el vocabulario para hablar de lo que les está pasando. Sí, fíjense. Hay que tomar en consideración algo característico de la cultura venezolana. Nuestra cultura antropológicamente está definida por la matricentralidad. ¿Qué significa? Ustedes hablaban ahorita de mujer centro. Acá estamos hablando de madre centro. Entonces, tienes una cantidad de vivencias o unas vivencias que se tejen a partir de la relación de la convivencia. De hecho, en términos antropológicos, nuestra cultura define al homo convivali, o lo define desde el homo convivali, es decir, el hombre de convivencia. Ese es el venezolano. Hasta ahora, en Venezuela, esa relación convivencial, esa relación matricentrada, se había desarrollado de modo armónico. La migración en este momento implica una ruptura en términos antropológicos y en términos culturales. Está obligando al venezolano a un desplazamiento forzoso, y eso va creando una narrativa, va produciendo un lenguaje, va produciendo unas prácticas que está totalmente rota respecto a la cultura original. Entonces, tomar la narrativa en el momento migratorio es muy revelador, porque estamos transitando con el migrante ese proceso de ruptura y el acercamiento a unas condiciones de vida completamente distintas. Por eso pega mucho con los controles que un régimen político como el nuestro en Venezuela ejerce sobre el cuerpo, ejerce sobre la persona. lo que hemos llamado el biopoder, ¿ok? Entonces, la persona en el tránsito, en ese tránsito de desplazamiento forzoso, está como reconstruyendo las vivencias más originales y las está rompiendo a su vez. ¿Qué aflora entonces en primera instancia? Aflora lo que va ocurriendo en sí mismo, lo que va ocurriendo en su cuerpo, lo que va ocurriendo en el tránsito, en el que, si ustedes ven en la narrativa de las historias que presentamos, está Yorli que se lleva a su hija, una niñita de 2 años. O sea, esa relación de la mamá con la niñita de 2 años, esa relación y ese desplazamiento tiene que hacerse en familia, porque precisamente el núcleo, el centro de la familia es la madre y es el hijo. Entonces se hace la travesía, se hace la relación, se hace el tránsito también en familia. Y eso va creando una significación, un lenguaje, unas palabras que los van incorporando, digamos, dentro de lo que podemos comprender un lenguaje del sufrimiento. Importante, solo para cerrar, importante tener en cuenta que este es un proceso inédito y estamos en desarrollo. Estamos tratando de tomarle el pulso en desarrollo. Esto todavía, yo creo que todavía no hemos dimensionado los efectos de la migración. Estamos en ese proceso de dimensionarlo. Y por supuesto, el lenguaje, la narrativa, las prácticas, el biopoder, el control, todo eso va a jugar un papel interesante.
Mira, thank you so much. Thank you for speaking so clearly in Spanish so that I was able to understand a little as you went. And again, to Katie for fast typing there. So again, in the chat, there is Katie's translation of Mirla's text here, really focusing on the way in which Mirla was speaking about one of the key characteristics of Venezuelan culture, and I would add here of many cultures worldwide, is a mother-centered culture. And the shared experiences that are woven together around the idea of convivencia, which means Katie's kindly translated living together or sharing space. And it's a word from which we take our idea of conviviality. And that this is leading, migration is leading to a break with this idea of conviviality, a complete break with the traditional way of living and speaking about experience. And I think this has real resonances with what Shri was speaking to us about. And we see a break. What we see is an idea of a break or a rupture in this. And this has a lot to do, Mirla was saying, with the limits placed on the person by the state through biopower. So again, back to this focus on the internal experience of the body and the external experience of the body. And as these roots of culture break, that they need to be rethought. The relationship between the mother and the daughter in the story, we're told, shows the relationship between the mother and child still at the heart of how people understand and tell the story of their experience. But that this is a new process, and you're very much still in the process of analyzing this and needing new narratives, new practices, and new developments as we speak, which I think is really fascinating what you're focusing on here, and particularly as within mainstream migration studies, and my migration colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong here, but we tend to focus on the journey. The story of the journey is what dominates the narratives. And if we're going to think about changing the narrative, there's a lot we need to learn from both you, Mirla, and from you, Shri, about the ruptures that you are focusing on and what can be done for you, Shri, after the rupture, and for you, Mirla, in a way, as the rupture is occurring, the way that you're showing that through. I can see we've a little bit of time left still, and that Diana has asked a question in the chat. Diana, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question in person?
Sure, no problem. Thank you so much, Alison. Mirla, yo intenté, yo no hablo español muy bien, soy brasileña, entonces hablo portuñol.
Es portugués.
Pero mis preguntas fueron traducidas por Katie muy bien en los comentarios. Son sobre la relación entre los pesquisadores, las personas que hacen la investigación y los migrantes. Muchas gracias.
Ok. Fíjense, nosotros nos acercamos al migrante. Específicamente, este cierre de investigación se hizo el año pasado. Hubo un proceso de cierre y apertura de la frontera a causa de la pandemia. Cuando ocurre la pandemia en Colombia, y bueno, cierra el frontera con Colombia, que vienen todos los emigrantes del sur, comienzan a llegar los retornados a Venezuela. En ese retorno, que nunca fue mayor al desplazamiento, nosotros fuimos al encuentro de estos retornados. Entonces pudimos hacer la investigación in situ. Digamos que para que ustedes más o menos puedan representarse la dimensión. Ahorita en cualquier lugar de Venezuela o de Caracas, usted va a conseguir en las comunidades un grupo importante de migrantes. O sea, el grupo focal tú lo puedes armar dentro de la propia comunidad y tener un gran número de participantes, de gente que ha retornado. Entonces, ese momento del retorno fue para nosotros una oportunidad muy interesante porque nos acercó directamente a la persona que salió y que vivió todo esto que ustedes han escuchado en la ponencia. ¿Ok? Pudimos tenerlo in situ. ¿Cómo lo hicimos? Bueno, fuimos acercándonos a las comunidades desde nuestras redes de trabajo, nos fuimos acercando a ellos, luego le pedimos que narraran la vivencia desde el punto que ellos quisieran. Digamos que nos presentaran la vida tal cual ellos la fueron viviendo. Y en eso consistió la narrativa de las personas. Priorizaron los elementos fundamentales que fueron definiendo esa travesía. Una vez que eso se logró hacer, hicimos la transcripción y sobre la base de la transcripción fuimos haciendo el trabajo de interpretación. Las bondades del grupo focal, que nosotros también utilizamos mucho, aparte de las historias de vida, es que pone en diálogo distintas vivencias. Entonces, cuando tú colocas a un grupo de personas a narrar sobre una vivencia específica, en este caso la migración, van surgiendo distintas experiencias. Entonces, en un grupo focal, tú podías tener personas que venían de Ecuador, que venían de Perú, que venían de Chile, que venían de Trinidad, que venían de Colombia, y te pueden dar cuenta que el trayecto para llegar a los distintos sitios son completamente distintos. Y las vivencias desde la cual parte la persona también es distinta. Entonces, digamos, hay un fondo cultural común, pero hay unas vivencias regionales que son diferentes. Y eso también es importante señalarlo. Por ejemplo, en la ponencia hablábamos de Barquisimeto, Guadualito. El interior de Venezuela en este momento está totalmente fragmentado. Les digo, o sea, la situación en el interior está mucho peor que la situación en el centro, en Caracas, la capital. Entonces, las vivencias que impulsan o que sacan al venezolano de su territorio son múltiples y tenemos que dimensionarlas según la región. Entonces, digamos que la riqueza de la narrativa está precisamente en eso, en haber vivido, en particular, haber vivido una trayectoria diferente y proceder de un lugar geográfico específico. No nos diferencia el lenguaje, tenemos el mismo lenguaje, todos hablamos castellano, pero la dimensión de los problemas sociales son diferentes según la región en la que estemos en el país. No sé si con esto respondo un poco las inquietudes.
Sí, muchas gracias. El trabajo es muy conmovedor e importante. Muchas gracias.
Gracias a ustedes.
Yeah, many thanks, Mila, for that really detailed response to a really important question from Diana about the ways in which the narratives were analysed, but also for Mila for really focusing on the way that the interior of Venezuela, and again, we're talking about the interior of a country like the interior of a body, is fragmented and fragmenting. And I think there's just some really strong metaphorical ideas coming through from the way that you're speaking and about these experiences and the focus on biopower here, but also for focusing on what happens when people talk between each other, the power of people who have been migrants in different countries being able to speak and share of their experiences. We have only a couple of minutes left, so I am going to draw this really rich conversation to a very premature close. I certainly want to carry on talking to Shri and Mila and Katie and Paul a lot more about this, and I know that I have many opportunities to do this. I am not going to try and be adequate to the task of thanking you for your generosity and your thoughts. I'm actually going to invite my colleague Tawana to do that task for you as a migrant himself. So to pick up that theme that Mila was just speaking of. So Tawana, if you'd like to just unmute and unhook your video, and I will let you do the thanking, and then we'll pass over straight from you to heaven.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tawana. It's always very difficult to follow Tawana, Gamli, or Nadensua when they do beautiful things, but I would just like to formally add my thanks to those of Alison, to all of our wonderful speakers, to Shri, to Katie, to Mila, to Paul, and the bigger initiative of which this is a part, and to Alison for chairing the conversation and pulling together the threads. It was fascinating, and I find the gendering of this and the sanitizing of the narratives a particularly resonant theme for me today, and I'm sure for other people there have been other themes that have resonated in different ways. So thank you all for joining us, and thanks also, of course, for the interesting questions and comments on the chat. Two things by way of conclusion. One is to thank Elise for organizing the event for us. Really appreciated putting everybody together and all of the logistics. The recording will be made available afterwards for those of you who want to pick up conversations, and we'll also try to share people's contact details if they want to follow up with some of the connections, which I can clearly see are all being made already. And just then to say that the final thing, our next share out will be on the 9th of February. We try to do something different each time, and the next one will have another member of our advisory board, who is Mina Pudel, who will be talking about some of her research in Southeast Asia. And probably most likely focusing on the situation in Nepal right now in terms of the precarity associated with COVID and the issues of people moving in and out of that particular context. So I do hope some of you can join us then. You probably get an invitation by virtue of coming to this one. So it'd be great to carry on the conversations and to keep weaving these connections between our different project areas. So yeah, thanks to you all really for this quite exciting start to what would otherwise be a quite hard week back at work. So thank you, and really hope to see you next time. And thanks to Wona again for playing us out. I don't know if we have a bit of Gamli in the Densua. I hate to put you on the spot, but I'm always happy to have some more music for my day. Otherwise, I'm sure Elise can bring us something at her fingertips. Now we can see the Densua. So thank you all once again, and enjoy the rest of your days or evenings or mornings, depending on where you are, and hope to see you again very soon. Thank you.